All I want to convince you from the first part is there is an interest in looking at precipitable water gradients in connection to in connection with moist convective activity in the tropics. Once we have seen this, I want to go on to the theoretical part of the talk where, as has been done in many talks on the first day, we will construct a first baroclinic mode which has an active water vapor component in it. The novelty will be that we will build in horizontal gradients of the saturation profile into this model, and then we will analyze the kind of modes we get or the convectively coupled waves that we get in a non-rotating case, which is slightly academic but of interest because of the symmetries of the problem. And then we will go to the equatorial beta plane, and I hope to convince you by the end that it is useful to look at these gradients in a simple setting, right? So let's begin with a very simple a picture. So this is from a relatively new reanalysis product called the Meradata. The only reason I look at it is that it has a very nice high resolution, and we took about 10 years and constructed means from this for seeing the general patterns of precipitable water. So this is a figure that's probably very familiar to most of you. The upper panel shows the mean precipitable water in millimeters over the tropics from 30 south to 30 north. So what I want to show you from this figure are essentially two things. The first is something that is that can be seen from the upper panel itself, is that if one goes from the equator towards higher latitudes, the precipitable water tends to fall off. Now, whether the decrease is monotonic or not, one can see that there are certain places where you have a double maximum, such as the South Pacific convergence zone, but usually the precipitable water falls off as one goes from the equator to the higher latitudes. Right? The second point, which is shown clearly in the panel below, is the longitudinal structure of precipitable water. And what I want to show you from this is mainly there are two envelopes of precipitable water in the tropics. The first, that begins off the coast of Africa, rises over Southeast Asia, reaches a maximum around the West Pacific, and then falls off by the East Pacific. The second envelope, which is much smaller, both in longitude as well as in magnitude, is an envelope that begins off the East Pacific, attains its maximum approximately over South America, and then falls off over the Atlantic Ocean. So you have a precipitable water structure which has two principal envelopes, right? So you can look at this in detail on both the hemispheres. The picture is basically the same. If you look at the northern hemisphere, you have your two precipitable water envelopes. The southern hemisphere actually has three, arguably. And the main point that I want to get is that these are very large scale features. In fact, the red lines that are plotted over here are just the means, just the reconstructions by retaining the first three harmonics, nothing more. So the basic structure is of a very large scale, but it is interesting. There is some structure, right? So once we have this structure, what I want to do is, I will not spend too much time on why this structure exists. That in itself is a non-trivial problem. For the time being, let's just say that there is this structure. The components that go into it predominantly are the subtropical anticyclones, as well as the accentuation of the longitudinal structure by the regional monsoon systems. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. We'll just say we have this structure and proceed, because we need this structure for the theoretical part of the talk, right? So once we have this structure, I'm going to do something that might seem a little awkward. I'm going to take the gradient of the precipitable water. Now, why am I looking at the gradient of precipitable water? This is something that hopefully will become clear by the end of the talk. For the time being, just look at these two panels. This shows you the contours, the positive contours. That is, these are the regions where the precipitable water is increasing as one goes from west to east. These are the regions where the precipitable water is increasing as one goes from west to east. Now, from east to west. Now, quite clearly, if you have one envelope, one side of it is going to have the negative gradients, one side is going to have the positive gradients. That's exactly what is seen over here. The more remarkable fact is that if you show this picture to somebody who is more into observing intraseasonal variability in the tropics, what you will notice, let's take, for example, these contours over here. These are precisely the regions where one observes the maxima in variance of moist convective Kelvin waves. This is something that has been well documented by the works of Liebman and Kiladis. Similarly, let's come over here. This is off the coast of Africa. This is probably the most predominant zone where MJOs are born. These are again eastward moving systems, just like the moist Kelvin waves. So what?
No, MJOs are born more northward.
Sure. I'm saying.
Gradients are climb too far south.
Right. I am saying that basically the longitudinal region that you have is roughly demarcated by these gradients. I'm not saying there is a strict correspondence. There is not a one-to-one correspondence. It's just a rough measure that these gradients have something to do with tropical interseasonal activity, especially their directionality, which is probably most cleanly seen by moist equatorial Rossby waves, which was put forth in the paper by Roundy and Frank and by Kilardis and Matthews and so on, is that if you look at moist equatorial Rossby waves, their maxima invariance occurs over the central Pacific. These waves are born here, they shoot off in a northwest direction, and in fact are observed over the West Pacific, right? So if you just take a very simple first order picture that one has envelopes of precipitable water and their gradients might have something to do with convective activity, then one can draw a very simple schematic. And the schematic is as follows. That is, consider the blue line. The blue line is an envelope of precipitable water. The red line, of course, more compact, is the gradient of precipitable water. And the schematic that we come up with is that the regions where the gradient is positive is usually where one observes moist eastward propagating systems. The regions where the gradients are negative are precisely where one observes moist westward moving systems. And this is the basic ingredient that we would like to put into a single baroclinic mode model to see whether these gradients actually support some kind of convectively coupled waves, right? So we say, well, why exactly would we consider gradients of precipitable water to have anything to do with waves? And this was put forth in a very nice paper about a decade ago by Sobel, Nilsson, and Polvani. And this paper essentially said that if one takes gradients in the background saturation profile on an F-plane, and one looks at the kinds of waves that are supported by these gradients, these are essentially moisture waves because they live on the gradient of moisture, just like your planetary waves live on the gradient of vorticity or of planetary vorticity. These waves live on the gradient of moisture. And being on an F-plane, the interesting thing is you don't have a gradient of planetary vorticity, so there is no competition between the two. You immediately get unstable eastward propagating mode. The interesting part is when you come to an equatorial beta plane, you actually do have this competition over here, and I hope to show that when we actually write down the first baroclinic mode on an equatorial beta plane, right? So the setup is essentially something that I guess by now we are familiar with. One can look at a classic paper by Gill from 1982, or the many papers that were discussed in the first talk by Professor Kuider or by Sam Steckman and yesterday in Professor Maeda's talk. We are essentially going to deal with a single baroclinic mode. U and V are your horizontal velocity fields. Theta prime is the potential temperature perturbation. The only sort of missing link apart from everything known here is S, which is going to be your heat source, right? So usually heat sources are given in some way. We say that, okay, instead of giving it, we are going to dynamically couple it by an advection condensation equation. Probably a very nice place to see this is a recent paper by Diaz and Paul Lewis. Paul Lewis is sitting right here. So what you do is you say that the precipitable water is advected by the entire baroclinic mode, and what we say is that the background feature that one has over here, which causes condensation to occur, is something that should reflect these gradients that we just saw. Therefore, we build in the gradients into the structure of the background saturation profile. The simplest structure to build in is a linear structure. So we say that Qs can be a constant. It can decay in the x or the zonal direction, or it can increase in the zonal direction. Therefore, alpha Q can be positive or negative. It falls off as one goes in the meridional direction. Therefore, beta is of a single sign, right? Once you take these ingredients, you can immediately write down a non-dimensional system, which again, the non-dimensionalization and so on can be seen very clearly in the paper by Gill, or a paper that I highly recommend is a paper by Frierson, Maeda, and Paulis written in 2004. Unfortunately, the journal is not JATS, it's what was Communications in Mathematical Sciences, and
Well, everything's available on.
right. So if you look,
Because it's a mathematics paper.
right. So if you actually look at that, this non-dimensionalization just follows essentially these classic techniques. And what I would like to point out here are the things that might be new. There are 2 or 3 things. One is the ratio tau A by tau C. So tau A is nothing but the non-dimensional time scale. Tau c is this time scale of condensation. So that's a parameter we have in the problem. We usually set that to epsilon, and epsilon will play a role later on. So we'll keep tau a by tau c in mind. The other things to note are, of course, the two gradients, which are characterized by the non-dimensional parameter Rm, alpha, and beta. And of course, typically, for the equatorial region, one has Q naught, or the measure of the precipitable water, being approximately 40-45 millimeters or so. It falls off, as I said, as one goes towards higher latitudes. So at the most, one can vary Rm, alpha, and beta over 1 to 4, because you can fall off, let's say, from 40 to 30 to 25 to 20 to 10. So a reasonable range for these parameters over here, Rm, alpha, and beta, which is the zonal and meridional variation of precipitable water, is approximately 1 to 4. This covers a fairly wide range, right? Now, finally, you have the parameter R. This is the traditional moist model, right? So if we...
So you have to put a cap somewhere, because you made linear dependence on
exactly.
profile.
So that's the...
Your linear dependence,
I should have mentioned that
you
here.
want to make negative,
Exactly. That's
negative values
exactly.
somewhere.
You obviously keep alpha and beta such that you don't make a QS negative.
But you can't do that unless you restrict.
There's a finite
Very
size.
narrowly.
Exactly. So that depends on what your scale. Yeah, of course. So once one has this, you can. The first thing to check is, okay, let's shut off everything that we have put in. Let's say that the gradients are non-existent. That is, alpha, Rm alpha, and Rm beta go to infinity. So these two terms go away. Okay. Now let's say that there is a limit of rapid condensation or strict quasi-equilibrium. What that means is this is almost constant, so the divergence is balanced by the heating. One can plug that in back over here, and all one gets is partial theta partial time minus 1 minus r times the divergence of u is equal to 0, which is your traditional moist system. And all that gives you are gravity waves which are slow by a factor of root of 1 minus r, which is the traditional result that one gets. What we want to do is to say, well, this is the traditional result which I just described. We want to put in the gradients. The first case we will consider is the case where one has meridional gradients. That is, Rm alpha is still infinity, so there are no zonal gradients. There's only a meridional gradient, that is Rm beta is not equal to infinity, right? So, what is the result from the first case? It's a very simple system to analyze in terms of linear stability, and what one gets are modes which have really no physical meaning for the real world, because this is a non-rotating problem. So what you get are unstable gravity waves. I've shown you contours where the imaginary part of sigma is, or the dispersion relation is greater than 0. You find that these are localized on kx is equal to 0, which is what you would expect. They really have a latitudinal character, no longitudinal character, because we have not imposed any longitudinal scale on the problem. Secondly, more importantly, I want you to see this figure over here. This shows you the real value of the dispersion relation for the unstable modes. Concentrate on quadrants 1 and 4, right? What do you see? Kx is greater than 0, sigma is less than 0, right? This quadrant, Kx is greater than 0, sigma is greater than 0. So these waves can go both in the east and the west direction. The problem is completely symmetric. That is, the unstable modes that one gets are large-scale gravity waves. They're localized around Kx equal to 0. You can vary the parameters R and Rm beta that you have. Most of these properties are very robust with respect to these parameters. You can also go to the limit of rapid condensation. You recover the same result qualitatively. The most important thing being that there is a symmetry in the problem. And this symmetry was spoken about by Professor Kuider, by Professor Maeda in his talk, and is actually mentioned in a paper that appeared in 2007 in PNAS, in the supplementary part, where they said that you can get symmetric modes if you are sitting over the equator, right? So the second part is, let's say you flip the situation and you put a zonal gradient. Now, obviously, as soon as you put a zonal gradient, the picture changes by approximately 90 degrees, and the modes are localized about ky is equal to 0. Because you have given a zonal scale to the problem, you see that the unstable modes have a zonal scale. But more importantly, I want you to see the next figure over here. Now, look at what happens in the first and fourth quadrant, as well as the second and third quadrant. These waves move only in one direction. These unstable modes move only in the westward direction, for alpha, Rm alpha being greater than 0. This is a gradient that increases to the west. These are waves that move to the west. You get only unstable modes in one direction. So the symmetry of the problem, because we have imposed an asymmetric condition on top of it, you get an asymmetric response, which is in accord with the schematic diagram that I had put forth. Of course, this is again fairly academic because we have no rotation in the problem. As soon as you put a background PW gradient or saturation profile gradient that goes in one particular direction, the unstable modes follow that direction, right? So, this is all fine, but we really want to move to equatorial B theta plane. Here things become a little more complicated because we need to augment the momentum equations with the Coriolis terms. As soon as you do that, once again one has to carry out a non-dimensionalization. Once again, for that I recommend the same papers, the work by Gill or the work by Frierson, Maeda and Paulus. You go through exactly the same steps and one can non-dimensionalize the problem. What one finds, and now I will make a statement here, is that we will show, or I will show you the results for the limit of rapid condensation because it turns out to be mathematically neater. In the limit of rapid condensation, the three equations that one has can be coupled together for a single equation for the meridional velocity. That equation has this form. Now this equation over here, if you shut off your gradients and you shut off R, is nothing but the classic 1966 Matsuno equatorial beta plane equation, right? So, as you have a character in Y, you look for solutions in this form and you get a polynomial eigenvalue problem which can be solved. What is the solution? Well, before I show you the solution, let me just recap. Our three parameters are these guys over here. The first case is where you shut everything off, you have the dry system. As soon as you put a vertical gradient and keep the horizontal gradients to be infinite, or there is no gradient, you get the traditional moist system which has all your traditional waves, but they are just slowed down, right? So the two cases that we want to consider are these guys over here. So the first one is where you have a meridional gradient, and this is what you see. Now immediately what you can notice is you have some modes that pop up over here. Now I've shown you a bunch of modes because the discretization has n points, so you get 3n modes. Now, what you see is that apart from the high frequency response, you have modes that move in the eastward direction because here kx is greater than 0 and sigma is greater than 0. You have these modes where sigma is less than 0, kx is less than 0. So these are eastward propagating modes. These modes are of a low frequency, and if you actually look at their non-dimensional phase speed, you find that there is asymmetric response where the westward modes are essentially like moist Rossby waves. The eastward modes are much slower than the moist Rossby waves, right? So the recap of the first part of the case 1 where you have the equatorial beta plane with the meridional gradient is, first of all, you have lost your instability. You have only neutral modes. These neutral modes, the high frequency response is the same as the traditional system. The low frequency response has a new mode, which is the eastward propagating neutral mode. This mode is slower than the westward propagating mode. What we would like to do is to look at this mode in a little more detail, right? So, this is the dispersion relation for the largest eastward propagating mode for reasonable values of your meridional gradient. What you find is that this dispersion relation changes rapidly for relatively small k, levels off for slightly higher values of k, and if one dimensionalizes this, you find that the dimensional phase speed of this eastward propagating mode is fairly slow. It's of the order of a few meters per second, especially if one chooses Rm beta equal to 2, which means that your precipitable water is falling off from about 40 to 20 millimeters, you get a phase speed that is of the order of 5 meters per second or 2 to 7 meters per second, right? Now, one can ask oneself what the eigenfunctions associated with this mode look like. You immediately find that the eigenfunctions are off equatorially located. The first eigenfunction is Gaussian. I've shown you the bold lines for Rm beta equal to 4. That is Gaussian in nature. The second eigenfunction is asymmetric. It is not perfectly co-located. The zero crossing does not match the peak of the Gaussian. Therefore, the structure associated with this mode is going to be shifted from the Gaussian center. Secondly, if one varies the gradient, for the strongest gradient, the modes get localized closer and closer to the equator. In fact, for the strongest gradient, you come very close to the equator over here. Secondly, if one goes back to the previous slide, one notes that as the gradient is increasing, the speed of these waves is also increasing, right? So you keep these two things in mind, and one can write down a simple summary that you have a eastward propagating neutral mode that has a small phase speed. Its first eigenfunction is Gaussian. Its second eigenfunction gives you a quadrupole structure which is out of phase with the Gaussian peak. Thirdly, its phase speed falls off for moderate values of k, that is, it flattens out. Next, if you go to the westward propagating mode, these are essentially Rossby waves, though slightly faster than traditional moist Rossby waves. Thirdly, you can look at these two guys and try to look at aquaplanet results. Most aquaplanet results produce robust eastward propagating large-scale modes. And aquaplanets, by and large, usually only have a meridional gradient of precipitable water. There is really no large-scale zonal inhomogeneity. So to appeal to any kind of zonal inhomogeneity to explain these large-scale modes is inappropriate. This probably provides a route by which one can think of these results over here. Lastly, the larger gradient giving you a localization near the equator and a faster speed is also consistent with recent work that was done again by Diaz and Paulus, where they varied the width of the ITCZ to see the speed of convectively coupled tropical waves, right? So this is all fine, but we have only done case one where there is purely a meridional gradient. What happens if you build in a zonal gradient in this case? That is the second figure over here. What you find is you get essentially the same answer with one remarkable difference. The solid lines are the lines where the modes have actually become unstable. And in fact, this is the case where the gradient is such that it is increasing in the eastward direction, and the modes that have become unstable are exactly the eastward propagating modes. So what we find is that when you take an equatorial beta plane, you impose a purely zonal gradient. Once again, one gets a low frequency response, which is similar to the response you got for the meridional gradient, but the modes now have become unstable, and the ones that have become unstable are precisely the ones that move in the eastward direction. So in the regions where the precipitable water increases from west to east, you get modes that move towards the east. And if you flip this over and do the calculation, when your gradient changes sign, you find that the larger scale modes that become unstable are precisely the westward moving modes, right? So if you summarize these, let me go first over here. Let's look at the first 2 points. Is that when you have an increasing precipitable water gradient from east to west, you have waves that go towards the west. And similarly, when the precipitable water gradient goes from west to east, you have waves that follow that gradient. Now, if you go back to the previous slide, this actually shows you the growth rate of the instability of these two waves. Let's focus on the upper part over here. These are the westward moving waves. They have an instability which reaches its maximum at approximately a wave number 5, right? These are the eastward moving guys, which are shown below over here. They have an instability which really doesn't have a maximum at any scale. The largest scales are unstable, but actually the largest instability occurs at synoptic scales or at a smaller scale, right? So if one puts this together, the last statement we have is that the westward moving modes, which have a growth rate that maximizes at wave number 5, is very close to what is observed for moist equatorial Rossby waves, as has been documented by a lot of people, especially by Kilardis and co-workers. A review of that can be found in Wheeler, Kilardis, and Webster JASP 2000. And this is precisely approximately the wave number that is picked out by these modes. The more interesting case is the case over here, because this is the much more difficult thing, right?
I'm sorry, I have to tell you right now, the skeleton model dynamically produces its own moisture gradient, self-consistently as a dynamical model. It doesn't impose it. And it's got the same kind of moisture gradients you're talking about, except they're dynamical objects.
Right.
And produced in the model automatically. So you're not really giving any insight into the skeleton model itself.
But that has, that's through the parameter A, the amplitude function. A and Q. But how does A come about?
A is the synoptic scale activity.
Right, so that is inside A.
Yes, it's inside A and through Q though. But Q itself has its own gradient.
Right, so that's exactly what.
Spontaneously.
Right.
Imposed.
But A is prescribed, right?
No, A is not prescribed. A is dynamic.
But A is given as a wave activity amplitude.
But that's a nonlinear coupled equation with Q and itself feeds back on.
That's true. So you're shutting off Q and putting an A.
Your comments about us is you throw the baby out with the bathwater, you put in a minor version of it, and then say that you've recovered it.
I don't think so.
I'm sorry.
So
I'm sorry.
all I'm saying is that if you have gradients of a system, it can support waves, and these waves have a certain character.
Yes,
That's
but
all.
You're way over-interpreting all of your results throughout this lecture.
Okay, that might be, but
Way over-interpreting.
but all I'm saying is that if you have a system that has gradients, it can support waves. This was documented pretty clearly by Sobel, Nielsen, and Polvani, and that's all I'm trying to extend.
For example, Kelvin waves are not, with their high variance off the coast of Peru. They have high variance everywhere.
But the highest wave...
No, not off the coast of Peru. It's in the IPCZ, far in central Pacific. Your matches are in the central
but by...
Pacific, at the IPCZ, not off the coast of Peru.
Right, but the work by Liebman and Kiladis differs with you.
No, not off the coast of Peru.
Actually,
We know that work very well.
Right. Yes, Roundy and Frank. That's precise. That is a continuation of Roundy and Frank. Okay. Sure, but the paper by Roundy and Frank also looked at Kelvin waves, right? Okay. Sure. But what I'm trying to say is that if you have gradients in moisture, you can support a certain class of waves, and these waves have a character of this kind. Sure, that might be the case.
You're not talking about their structure and how relevant their structure matches the observation.
I'm not at all.
Waves don't match the structure of the observation.
No, I'm just saying that there are. I'm just saying there's a class of waves that could be interesting. That's all. That's about it. So, as there seem to be severe objections from people over here, I'm going to say that I still believe that this is not as trivial as is put forth, and there is something to do with these gradients, which are climatological mean states of the tropics. And these states are states that have to be taken into account into a simple model. And when one puts in these states into a simple model, one generates a certain class of waves, which might have something to do with tropical variability. Whether they are the end result, I'm not claiming they're a theory for anything as is claimed for other models. All I'm saying is that these are waves that are of interest. That's about it. Thanks.
Okay, it is time for discussion now. So maybe,
okay, so I'll just continue. Notice my comments were recorded. Notice my first comments, I didn't have a microphone. So I think this work, you need to not just plot wave number diagrams, but show wave structures.
Sure, it's all in progress.
And you sent me your preprint, and you have no wave structures in your preprint.
Still going on,
and guess what? Your wave structures will not look like the natural objects you're claiming.
I'm not saying this is the MJO or anything of that sort.
And secondly, the start of your talk, I just have to tell you, the MJO is not born off equatorial Africa. The high variance of the Kelvin waves is not off Peru. These things, your impressions are order of magnitude phase shifted. There are huge Kelvin wave activities everywhere in the tropical Pacific. The precipitable water climatological values are very different. They're changed radically in a suppressed phase of the MJO and an active phase of the MJO. Having the mean values put in can be very meaningless for dynamical propagation of precipitable water. So there are a lot of caveats.
Right.
So many caveats, I'm not convinced.
Okay.
Sorry.
Is there any relation between Rm alpha, Rm beta, and R? I mean, is there any constraint or any relation that one can think of?
Well, I guess not between the vertical and the horizontal that clearly, right? So the horizontal part, you have to maintain positivity, but beyond that, it's just based on how much these things are falling off, right?
But the horizontal gradients would force R to change, right? The horizontal gradients in PWAT would
Sure.
force the vertical gradient in PWAT to change.
Right, so right
Is
now
it
we are
so?
keeping that fixed, right?
Yeah.
Right, that's it. So, right.
So in spite of differences of opinion about correspondence to reality, I thought that these models were very interesting. The models where you impose a climatological gradient of water vapor, giving you different space and time scales, is a very interesting problem.
I don't dispute that, by the way. I dispute the over-interpretation.
No, I'm not sure.
I don't dispute the interest in putting in a gradient of moisture.
Sure, sure. No, I understand that. That's fine. Yeah.
I would just like to bring an observational fact with regard to the East Asian summer monsoon, right from Pacific towards India. There are important gradients in the PW, east-west as well as north-south.
Sure.
So, according to your theory and all that, see, they become crucial for what is called generating waves and all that, wave activity.
Sure,
Those mixed, the moist Rossby wave activity.
Sure. So that's one of the things that was asked by Sulochana to me is also what is the what would be the role of this in the northward propagation of some systems. But what I think is that these gradients are things on which waves can live, or even if they don't create them, they can feed off these gradients. And for example, for the westward or northwestward propagating equatorial Rossby wave, if you have this gradient, you immediately get an unstable wave of the precise wavelength that is observed, and it moves exactly in the north. Sure, sure. I'm just saying it has a mode in that regime. So that's all. So now, as you're saying, I feel that these gradients should therefore be explored. See what kind of gradients one actually is seeing and the correspondence with the waves. You're right. Yeah.
Because now we are putting a lot of instruments what measures the precipitable water vapor across India. There are several precipitable water. Instead of getting through the radio sound which are defective, they will get the system measure directly the precipitable water. And that will be, we will see what kind of enhancement occurs on the synoptic scale with regard to this precipitable water.
Sure, that we are. Okay.
I have just a quick, it's a technical question actually, it's not really anything profound. So in your dispersion relations, I noticed that your Kelvin waves are going westward. Do you know why?
Actually, if you put it in the bounded channel, you can get westward moving Kelvin. This is done by, if you look at Kane and Sarachik and so on, these are sometimes called anti-Kelvin waves and so on. So one can get them also.
But they are still growing.
No.
They're not trapped.
Right.
They grow yeah, okay.
Right, so these are modes that were observed by those guys, and there's a long history of them in their numerical work. In their numerical work. Not
okay.
Right.
So these are fake.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay, so let us congratulate the speaker and Courant Institute.